Good evening, explorers, and welcome to my Into the Radius weapons tier list, Remastered. I know I've already done this before, but let's be honest, that video was pretty dog shit, so I'm redoing it with a little bit more thought put into it and in a nicer package. So let's lay down some criteria. This list is made with my playstyle and my preferences in mind. And so I'm judging them on these totally objective attributes. Number 1, economic viability. Straight up, this is a poor man's tier list. This is a tier list for the explorers who live inside of a safe house and sustain themselves solely off of knockoff Red Bull and candy bars that are banned in the European Union for the fun of it. It's also a tier list for people who kind of suck at the game and are living paycheck to paycheck because they need a small country's ammunition stockpile to take on one POI inside of Pobeda Factory. And don't make fun of those guys. We were all there at some point. Number 2, effectiveness at their security level. Obviously, a Scar is more effective than, let's say, a Keter, but they are in two completely different security level brackets. And because of that, they can be rated pretty similarly on this tier list. And number 3, satisfaction. Simply put, how fun I think the weapons are to use. I'm going to try to limit how much I let this one affect my placements, but just know the bias will be there and I will make it known what guns I have a somewhat irrational affection for. Alright, with that out of the way, let's start off with the Makarov. Now straight up, this is statistically the worst gun in the game. 8 rounds of 9x18 doing a pitiful 15 damage a pop sucks pretty bad. However, it does get somewhat of a pass because it's the gun you start out with. It's given to you for free with a decent amount of starting ammo, and for what it's worth, it will serve you until you can get a better weapon. It does its job as a starter gun, and for that, it's going in the C tier. Next up is the GSH-18. The GSH, while also using 9x18, has a bit more bite to it at 20 damage. Still admittedly not great, but the real upgrade is its 18 round capacity, making it the second highest capacity handgun of the game. It's obtainable for free starting in Balaki, but even if you don't want to wait, it's only $600. It's a solid gun to use in the early game and can work as a decent sidearm even going into the late game, especially if you're running plus P rounds. So I'm putting it into A tier. Overall, it's a good gun. Moving on to the OTS-33, it has the same 20 damage as the GSH, but with a 27 mag capacity and full auto capability. However, at a $2,200 price point, it's a bit expensive for what it is, although you can get them free in crates starting in Pobeda. Personally, I probably wouldn't buy this one, but if you do find it, it's a great way to use up some of that 9x18 ammo without sacrificing a primary slot for the PP91. Plus, I will admit, full auto is always fun. So I'm going to put it just ahead of the GSH in A tier. The TT-33 Tokarev pistol. My beloved. It is no secret that I am a huge fan of this gun. Chambered in 7.62x25, it does 30 damage per shot and has an 8 round mag. Which doesn't sound like anything to write home about, but its unusually high muzzle velocity makes long-range shots significantly easier than with other pistols. As far as availability goes, it's basically free as there is a stash in Pervome, and it even comes with a suppressor. One last advantage that it has is the slightly higher armor penetration when using FMJ compared to other pistols. 7.62x25 has an FMJ pen chance of 50%, as opposed to the 30% of the other pistol cartridges. Plus B is still the same as the other options, and is a far better option when available, but it's still nice to have. This thing has been my ride or die since day one playing Into the Radius, so it's getting a comfy spot in S tier. Moving on to the Glock 17. It's one of the handguns of all time. Kinda like in reality, Glocks in-game are the economy sedans of the handgun world. Nothing special, and they're kinda ugly, but the damn thing just works. Doing 25 damage with 9x19 rounds feeding from a 17 round mag, it's a decent sidearm. Now the only issue I have with it is the accuracy isn't the greatest. Between the sights and the natural aim spread, those long-range shots can be a bit challenging, but overall, it's serviceable. You can also get them for free in crates starting in Balaki or in a stash in Pervome. Although the stash Glock does come a bit wrecked, so there is a tiny bit of upfront cost to repair. Overall, while pretty solid, it is thoroughly outshined by one of its alternatives, so I'm gonna have to stick it into B tier. The aforementioned alternative being the M9. This gun has pretty much everything going for it. 30 damage, high accuracy, high reliability, good capacity. The M9 is a fantastic all-rounder and everyone in their mother uses it. A big advantage is that it is obtainable from a stash right from the very beginning of the game if you know what you're doing. It does come damaged, but it is the biggest upgrade that you can get right off the bat and will probably stay in your holster as your go-to sidearm for the remainder of the game. Load it with plus P and it can make short work of even the harder areas and missions without too much resistance. I used to call this thing a bit overrated, but honestly there's a reason why it's so beloved. And because of that, it's going up in S tier. Realistically, it definitely belongs in front of the Tokarev, but fuck you. It's my tier list. You wanna fucking fight about it? Moving on to the G17's older and cooler... Moving on to the G17's younger and cooler brother, the G18C. Remember how I compared the G17 to an economy sedan? The G18 is like a ricer. This thing is all about speed, and that's really all it has going for it over, say, the M9. That and its high price point just don't really make it worth it in my eyes. It's fun, and it's probably good if a slider catches you with your pants down to your ankles, but overall, I gotta put it into B tier. Next up are the 357 weapons, the Deagle and the MP412. This is gonna be controversial, but I don't really like them that much. Late game, expensive, inaccurate as fuck compared to everything else, loud. It's just not attributes that I want in my guns. Now don't get me wrong, they are fun and absolutely decimate in close quarters, but they aren't useful for that long and can sometimes get you into trouble by attracting a little bit too much attention. I'm putting them together because they are basically side grades of one another. One being mag-fed and the other one being cylinder-fed, both having their merits considering each shot does 100 damage. I do prefer the convenient topping off of the Rex though. They are both going in to C tier. So I somehow forgot that the Rex does 150 damage. I think that Stalker mod has just seriously distorted my perception of this weapon. Anyway, because the Rex has a considerable damage advantage over the Deagle, I'm putting it into high B tier instead. That 150 is just insane. That's more than a Mosin does. Next up are the shotguns. Starting off with the sawed-off, D tier, straight up. I hate this thing with a passion. The spread is absolutely abysmal. It's basically a very loud melee weapon. In most cases, you're better off using knives against whatever you're trying to kill. Even the fact that this thing is guaranteed for free doesn't help its case. There is only one good use case for it, and that's as early game slider repellent. Even then, if you're fighting sliders that early in the game, you've probably gunned at the Kolkhoz. And at that point, that shot you just rang out is about to pose a bigger threat to you than the slider itself ever could have, because now you have a hit squad of armored mimics coming for you. I know that a lot of newer players like to use it to kill fragments and spawns, but just do yourself a favor and just learn to stab things. You'll save ammo, weight, and 61 eardrums.
If you or a loved one has suffered hearing loss or tinnitus after
shooting this fucking shotgun,
you may be entitled to compensation.
Moving on to the sawed-off's pre-bastardized condition, the IZH-27. The major difference here is that it goes from the least accurate shotgun to the most accurate shotgun. The spread on the IZH-27 is really good, making buck shit worth a damn at pretty decent range. That, combined with the fact that it is obtainable for free starting in Pervomay, makes it a pretty decent viable option for the beginning of the game. The only major issue that all shotguns share is that its usefulness is somewhat short-lived. In Pervomay and Balaki, the IZH-27 is very good. Past that, not so much. Armored enemies make the use of slugs a necessity, and unfortunately, slugs just don't penetrate that well past really close range. Combine that with the 2-round capacity, and it just makes for a pretty short-lived gun. And because of that, I'm gonna have to drop it into low B tier. Maybe C, we'll see. Next up is the ICH-81, and the only thing that this gun does exceptionally well is be fun to use. You can get one in the stash from Pobeda, and I always grab it right after that tape recorder mission. I can't remember what the name was right off the top of my head. I will say, at this point of the game, it's not great. There are better options. Basically, any rifle will outclass this thing, but there's something magical about using it that makes me always want to use it. I want to put this thing in S tier based on fun factor, but because of its limited window of usefulness, I'm going to put it just in the A tier. Moving on is a fan favorite, the Spaz 12. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm just not seeing it with this one. Locked at security level 4 and costing $5,500, I just gotta ask, why? A rifle will serve you better in pretty much every situation, and those you can get completely for free. Not only that, but the aim spread is a drastic downgrade compared to the prior shotguns, minus the sawn-off. I don't know, if you like this thing, more power to you, but for my playstyle, it just doesn't fit. It's going down in the C tier. Finally, the ultimate auto shotty, the Saiga 12. And, I mean, it's the same story as the Spaz 12. Expensive, outclassed, inaccurate, and not very good outside of close range. And just to be clear, these aren't bad guns, you can make them work well. But shotguns just don't keep up with rifles in terms of versatility and range. So, I gotta put it next to the Spaz 12 in C tier. Moving on to the submachine guns, let's start with the PPSH. Boasting 30 damage per shot and accepting either 35 round stick mags or 71 round drum mags, it's a little beast of a machine gun. The only thing I don't like about it is the fact that it has to be purchased from the shop for $3,000. Other than that though, it's a great gun that can melt pretty much anything, even with FMJ, since its armor pen is a cut above the other SMGs. I'm putting it in B tier because its shorter, uglier sibling has a beat out in pretty much every category. Hear me out. The short PPSH is a fantastic weapon in all but looks. It can be free, boasting the same 30 damage per shot, having less weight and a little bit less accuracy. However, the kicker, for me, is the difference in handling characteristics. Simply put, the short PPSH has pistol handling, while the long PPSH has rifle or long gun handling. This makes a huge difference. Basically, with any gun that uses pistol handling, what I do with my left hand does not affect the weapon's aim. This makes it possible to stabilize my hands by holding them into each other. This is why I'm much more accurate with pistols as opposed to rifles or long guns. So even though the short PP is statistically less accurate, I can still land shots with greater consistency. So yeah, despite its relatively crude appearance, the short PPSH takes the cake hands down. It's an effective weapon at any stage of the game. The only downside is its inability to be suppressed. S tier. Anyway, next up is the Keter, and like the short PPSH, it's surprisingly good. It has the same pistol handling characteristics and can be obtained pretty free early on. The only thing I absolutely despise are the iron sights. I'm just no good with them. So I would recommend getting an optic for this one to really unlock its full potential. Again though, a good option for all stages of the game, but it's just falling short of the PPSH, so I'm going to put it into A tier. The MP5 it's a bit of a disappointment. It was my go-to gun back in the day, and on paper, it's still a really good weapon. 35 damage, very modular, good capacity. What's wrong with it then? Well, it has the handling characteristics of a rifle with none of the benefits. Because of how close you have to keep your hands together, it's pretty hard to keep the weapon stable, and it lacks the focus feature. That combined with these goofy-ass iron sights, and I just straight up can't hit the broadside of a fucking barn while using it. Which is really weird because it's the gun that I used to beat the game for the first time, like, years ago. I'm not sure if I changed or the gun did, but it just doesn't feel good for me to use. That being said, it's still a statistically good weapon that you can get for free, albeit a bit later in the game. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in B tier. Now this is what I'm talking about. Everything the MP5 does wrong, the PP2000 gets it right. Boasting the higher damage at a whopping 40 with the favorable pistol handling style, this thing is pretty insane. When loaded with plus P, this thing does as much damage as a FAL chambered in 7.62 NATO. Yes, we are still talking about a 9mm submachine gun. The only drawback to the PP2000 is the lower mag capacity of 20, which admittedly does kind of suck, but it's very workable. Overall, I'm going to put this one into A tier. I just like it more. Finally, onto the top dogs. Let's start with the SKS. So, I know a lot of you ain't going to like this one, but the SKS is what I would consider a noob gun. It is the earliest rifle you can buy, with it being available at security level 2, with some pretty favorable characteristics. 70% armor penetration with FMJ, compatible with a PU scope, and good accuracy. This is the closest thing to a DMR or a sniper that you're going to get at a security level. However, at security level 2, this thing is just kinda unnecessary, to be honest. An SMG will do you just as good, if not better, in most situations up until that point. And if you just hold on for one more security level, then you get introduced to Pobeda Factory, which you are very likely to get a rifle in that is not only free, but better in pretty much every way. And because of that, it's going into D tier. It's not bad. It's not a bad gun. It's just unnecessary, you know? Next up is the AKM, one of the many AKs, but to be honest, this one is my favorite, and it primarily comes down to that armor penetration. Like with the SKS, 7.62x39 provides a 50% armor penetration rate when using FMJ, a 20% advantage when compared to 5.56 or 5.45. It may not sound like much, but at least for me, it makes a huge difference. With the other intermediate cartridges, you have to run AP to have more consistent damage output against armored targets. But the AKM just doesn't give a fuck. The fact that it can be obtained for free or at a sizable discount makes this one of the best guns for my playstyle personally. The only drawback is the accuracy isn't too great. By too great, I mean you might have some inconsistencies hitting at the edge of your render distance. It doesn't matter for 99% of scenarios though. Anyway, for me, it's an easy S tier. Oh boy, let's talk about the 5.45 AKs. We're gonna put the AK-74 and the AKS-74U right next to each other, as they are very similar. The only difference, the AK-74U is lighter and the 74 has less recoil and more accuracy. Although I think the differences are fairly negligible, they can both be obtained for free in crates starting in Pobeda Factory. These are both very good weapons, accurate enough and very versatile. I lean a bit more towards the 74U, but I'm putting both of these into A tier. The outlier of the AK family, the AK-74M, is the only one that has to be purchased, which does bring it down a few points. However, it is statistically better than its counterparts by a slight margin in every sense except for recoil, because it doesn't fucking have any. The gun just doesn't move when firing full auto and is by far the best gun to use full auto with. Its automatic precision makes it stand out quite starkly from the rest of the lineup, granting it very rapid, high damage from a pretty surprising distance. The gun's just plain fun and effective, so despite its cost and scarcity, I'm still gonna put it into A tier. There are only two 5.56 options, one of them being the classic M4. Everyone knows it, everyone loves it, except for me. In game at least, because honestly, I don't really see much of a reason to use it. The 5.45s have very similar capability to the M4, and to be quite frank, the AK-74M just pretty much blows it out of the water while being the same price. If you buy an M4, you're just buying it because it's an M4, and that's perfectly fine. But it doesn't do anything special or have a compelling reason for me to get it over the other intermediate rifles. Factoring that in with its high cost, I gotta put it in the C tier. in my opinion, it's just not worth it. Again, unless you want an M4. Now moving on to the AUG, and it's a much different story here. Not only is the AUG available not necessarily for free, but at a hefty discount, it does have a couple of unique features that make it stand out. The most notable is that despite being a selective fire weapon, it doesn't have a selector switch. It has a progressive trigger. Basically, pulling the trigger back partially will make it fire in semi-auto, and pulling it back all the way will engage full auto. And full auto to me is kind of like a seatbelt. If it's off, you can't really effectively put it on when you're, mid-car accident. With the AUG, there is no manual input needed. Both full and semi-auto is always available, so if you get caught by surprise, you can retaliate with just a wall of fucking lead. It saved me on a deathless run, and I have never undervalued it since. Overall, fun, effective gun that you can get for a reasonable price. It's going in S tier. Alright, so, the AS Val and the VSS Ventores are, again, two weapons that I'm lumping together since they serve a similar role and function closely to one another. And to be honest, both of these are fucking amazing. High penetration, high damage, 70 on the Val, 80 on the VSS, and incredibly quiet. These are your sneaky breaky boys, and they are some of the most satisfying guns to use in the game. The only real downside to them is their low projectile velocity. Long-range shots on target are more difficult than normal, especially if they're moving. Nevertheless though, they are both incredible weapons combining power and subtlety in a uniquely lethal package. The main difference between the two weapons is one being full auto and the other being semi, but more accurate and a little bit more powerful. I do slightly prefer the Val, but overall they are both going into A tier. It would be S tier if it wasn't for the fact that you have to purchase them and they are somewhat expensive. The Groza is stinky, and I hate it. It's going into D tier. You know what? Fuck it. Send it straight to hell. I hate it. Fuck that thing. It's an abomination unto God, and if you like it, you should feel bad. Okay, fine. I'll try to judge the Groza objectively. Somewhat. Kinda. We'll see. And you know what? I'll say it. It's a good gun. High damage, full auto, high penetration, built-in grenade launcher, and you can get it completely free. Yeah, this gun should be a winner. It probably should go up here, but I don't like it. It feels gross, it looks disgusting, and it personally offends me. So it's going into D tier, and there's not a single fucking thing that you can do to stop me. Moving on, we have the FN FAL. So, I'm a bit conflicted on this one. On one hand, it can be free, but only for the final stretch of the game. So, honestly, it doesn't really count. It's decently cheap for what it is, and can be suppressed, but there's just something about it that feels a bit off. Like, it feels like a waste using good 7.62 NATO in this thing, because it feels like I'm just leaving damage on the table, you know? It's very sufficient compared to things like the M14 or SCAR, but I just feel like I could be getting more, you know? Anyway, still a solid gun overall, but there are better options. Let's go in B tier. Speaking of better options, I think the M14 might just be that, doing a whopping 120 damage per shot. This is the premier DMR. Its high damage and 20 round capacity make it a very devastating rifle to be on the receiving end of. However, it does have a couple critical weaknesses. Firstly, the recoil is insane, so rapid fire at close range can be difficult if you don't pace your shots properly. And second, it is really loud and cannot be suppressed. So be ready for company when you're using it, although this thing shouldn't have any issue dispatching the reinforcements, if you catch my drift. And one last thing is that it does have fairly poor reliability. All that being said, because of its drawbacks, it is more suited to a defensive role and can struggle outside of that niche. So I'm putting it in B tier, just above the FAL. The SCAR, the Mac Daddy, the apex predator in this big pond of guns, is not for me. I will say right now that the SCAR is the complete package. High damage, modular, suppressible, low recoil, high penetration, high reliability. There isn't a single box that the SCAR doesn't check off. Long range, CQC, it just doesn't care. You can throw whatever you want at it, and it just dies. All of that being said, it still suffers from being too expensive and obtained far too late. I have never used the SCAR outside of testing and fucking around because every single time I get to it, I already have another gun that I'm having fun with. The end game is just too short for me to be incentivized to drop 12K on this fucking thing. Look, I'll say it. It is absolutely a me issue, okay? This is the best gun of the game. It's just not the best gun for me. I'll still put some respect on its name though, and give it S tier. Low S tier. Because I still like this other shit a lot more. Finally, the other 5-digit priced gun is the DVL-10. And I'm gonna keep it real, it's the exact same thing as it was for the SCAR. It's fantastic, it's just too much and far too late. I will say, it is satisfying dropping mimics from fucking Narnia with a toe shot and watching none of his buddies react or have a fucking clue what's going on. And for that, it's going into A tier, just because it is still really good. It's not that it's not good, it just doesn't fit me. Alright, last two. Let's talk about the Mosin. And if you know anything about me, I love this gun. It's just one of those guns that just checks off all of my boxes. Free, satisfying to use, effective against armor without needing expensive ammo. There's just something so fulfilling when you take off a mimic's head with iron sights at like 300 meters. The Mosin just offers a unique experience when compared to the other guns. Because it's bolt action, you tend to savor every shot. It's a lot like the IZH-81, except this is good and stays good for pretty much the rest of the game. It's a perfect balance between availability, effectiveness, and fun. And for that, go in an S tier. And finally, the Mosin's grandson, the SVD or the Tiger Rifle. It's basically just a mag-fed, semi-auto Mosin. Due to its fast follow-up shots, it does make for a far more effective weapon at close range. And it has one big advantage over the M14, the ability to be suppressed. So this thing handily takes the cake when we're talking about a DMR role. Like with most of the late game weapons, the main issue is price and scarcity. Although being available at security level 4, I am a bit more inclined to get this, since it's useful for a bit longer than some of the other late game weapons. Overall for me, it's a solid A tier gun. And that about wraps up the list. If you want a more in-depth guide on the weapons, ammo, and equipment of Into the Radius, then go check out my range series of videos. There I go into far more detail so you can make the best choice when deciding what weapons you should run, along with stuff like consumables and armor statistics. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Until next time, explorers.